This Sentinel battery can be used to provide additional power to your ship. Several modules remain unused. Finding more batteries will enable you to utilize the full functions of your command station.
They're different. Beat versus. That's for anywhere.
There is a Sentinel power core nearby. You can use it to activate them and clear a path forward. life signal is nearby. There are The extraction point has been identified. I will mark its location on your HUD.
Doom Eternal is new, it's fresh, and we're loving the hell out.
The podcast medium, but it's the fact that it was started by people that don't give a damn about quote unquote demand. Sort of that there's a relaxed sort of the style like that Joe Rogan does. There's a freedom to express ideas in an unconstrained way that's very real. It's kind of funny in that it feels so refreshingly real to us today, and I wonder what the future looks like. It's a little bit sad now that quite a lot of sort of more popular people are getting into podcasting, and they try to sort of they try to control it, they try to constrain it in different kinds of ways. People I love, like Conan O'Brien and so on, different comedians, and I'd love to see where the real aspects of this podcasting medium persist. Maybe in TV, maybe in YouTube, maybe Netflix is pushing those kind of ideas, and it's really exciting where that kind of sharing of knowledge.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a double-edged sword as it becomes more popular and more profitable, where on the one hand, you'll get a lot more creativity, people doing more interesting things with the medium, but also perhaps you get this race to the bottom where suddenly maybe it'll be hard to find good content on podcasts because it'll be so overwhelmed by, the latest bit of viral outrage.
So speaking of that, jumping on effective altruism for a second. So much of that internet content is funded by advertisements. Just in the context of effective altruism, we're talking about the richest companies in the world are funded by advertisements. Essentially, Google, that's their primary source of income. Do you see that as? Do you have any criticism of that source of income? Do you see that source of money as a potentially powerful source of money that could be used? Well, certainly can be used for good, but is there something bad about that source of money?
I think there's significant worries with it, where it means that the incentives of the company might be quite misaligned with, making people's lives better. Where, again, perhaps the incentives are towards increasing drama and debate on your social media feed, in order that more people are going to be engaged, perhaps compulsively involved with the platform. Whereas there are other business models, like having an opt-in subscription service, where perhaps they have other issues, but there's much more of an incentive to provide a product that its users are just really wanting. Because, now I'm paying for this product, I'm paying for this thing I want to buy, rather than I'm trying to use this thing and they're trying to get a profit mechanism that is somewhat orthogonal to me actually just wanting to use the product. And so, in some cases it'll work better than others. I can in theory imagine Facebook having a subscription service, but I think it's unlikely to happen anytime soon.
Well, it's interesting. It's weird now that you bring it up that it's unlikely. Because, for example, I pay, I think, $10 a month for YouTube Red. And I don't think I get it much for that, except just, so no ads.
Yeah.
But in general, it's just a slightly better experience. And I would gladly, now I'm not wealthy, in fact I'm operating very close to $0, but I would pay $10 a month to Facebook and $10 a month to Twitter, or some kind of more control, in terms of advertisements and so on. But the other aspect of that is data, personal data. People are really sensitive about this. I, as one who hopes to one day create a company that may use people's data to do good for the world, wonder about this. One, the psychology of why people are so paranoid. Well, I understand why, but they seem to be more paranoid than is justified at times. And the other is, how do you do it right? It seems that Facebook is it seems that Facebook is doing it wrong. That's certainly the popular narrative. It's unclear to me actually how wrong. Like I tend to give them more benefit of the doubt because they're, it's a really hard thing to do right. And people don't necessarily realize it. But how do we respect, in your view, people's privacy?
I mean, in the case of how worried are people about using their data, I mean, there's a lot of public debate and criticism about it. When we look at people's revealed preferences, people's continuing massive use of these sorts of services, it's not clear to me how much people really do care. Perhaps they care a bit, but they're happy to, in effect, kind of sell their data in order to be able to use a certain service.
That's a great term, revealed preferences. So these aren't preferences you self-report in a survey. This is like your actions speak.
Yeah, exactly. So you might say, oh yeah, I hate the idea of Facebook having my data. But then when it comes to it, you actually are willing to give that data in exchange for being able to use the service. And if that's the case, then I think unless we have some explanation about why there's some negative externality from that, or why there's some coordination failure, or if there's something that consumers are just really misled about, where they don't realize why giving away data like this is a really bad thing to do, then ultimately I kind of want to, respect people's preferences. They can give away their data if they want. I think there's a big difference between companies' use of data and governments having data, where, looking at the track record of history, governments knowing a lot about their people can be very bad if the government chooses to do bad things with it. And that's more worrying, I think.
So let's jump into it a little bit. Most people know, but actually I, 2 years ago, had no idea what effective altruism was until I saw there was a cool looking event in an MIT group here. Mm-hmm. It's called the Effective Altruism Club or a group. I was like, what the heck is that?
Yeah.
And one of my friends said, he said that they're just a bunch of eccentric characters. Uh-huh. So I was like, hell yes, I'm in. So I went to one of their events and looked up what's it about. It's quite a fascinating philosophical and just a movement of ideas. So can you tell me what is effective altruism?
Great. So the core of effective altruism is about trying to answer this question, which is, how can I do as much good as possible with my scarce resources, my time and with my money? And then once we have our best guess answers to that, trying to take those ideas and put that into practice, trying to do those things that we believe will do the most good. And we're now a community of people, many thousands of us around the world, who really are trying to answer that question as best we can and then use our time and money to make the world better.
So what's the difference between sort of classical general idea of altruism and effective altruism?
So normally when people try to do good, they often just aren't so reflective about those attempts. So someone might approach you on the street asking you to give to charity, and you'll, if you're feeling altruistic, you'll give to the person on the street. Or if you think, oh, I want to do some good in my life, you might volunteer at a local place, or perhaps you'll decide, pursue a career where you're working in a field that's kind of more obviously beneficial, like being a doctor or a nurse or a healthcare professional. But it's very rare that people apply the same level of rigor and analytical thinking to lots of other areas we think about. Take the case of someone approaching you on the street. Imagine if that person instead was saying, hey, I've got this amazing company, do you want to invest in it? It would be insane. And no one would ever think, oh, of course, I'm just a company. Like, you'd think it was a scam. But somehow we don't have that same level of rigor when it comes to doing good, even though the stakes are more important when it comes to trying to help others than trying to make money for ourselves.
Well, first of all, so there is a psychology at the individual level of doing good just feels good. And so, in some sense, on that pure psychological part, it doesn't matter. In fact, you don't want to know if it does good or not, because most of the time it won't.
Yeah.
So, like, in a certain sense, it's understandable why altruism without the effective part is so appealing to a certain population. By the way, let's zoom out for a second. Do you think most people... Two questions. Do you think most people are good? Question number 2 is, do you think most people want to do good?
So, are most people good? I think it's just super dependent on the circumstances that someone is in.
Yeah.
I think that the actions people take and their moral worth is just much more dependent on circumstance than it is on someone's intrinsic character.
So is there evil within all of us? It seems like the better angels of our nature, there's a tendency of us as a society to tend towards good, less war. I mean, with all these metrics. What is that, us becoming who we want to be, or is that some kind of societal force? What's the nature versus nurture thing here?
Yeah, so in that case, I just think, so violence has massively declined over time. I think that's a slow process of cultural evolution, institutional evolution, such that now the incentives for you and I to be violent are very, very small indeed. In contrast, when we were hunter-gatherers, the incentives were quite large. If there was someone who was, potentially disturbing the social order and hunter-gatherer setting, there was a very strong incentive to kill that person. And people did, and it was just regarded, 10% of deaths among hunter-gatherers
Arguably,
were murdered.
after hunter-gatherers, when you have actual societies, is when violence can probably go up because there's more incentive to do mass violence, right? To take over conquer other people's lands and murder everybody in place and so on.
Yeah, I mean, I think total death rate from human causes does go down, but you're right that if you're in a hunter-gatherer situation, your kind of group that you're part of is very small, then you can't have massive wars that just massive communities don't exist.
But anyway, the second question: do you think most people want to do good?
Yeah, and then I think that is true for most people. I think you see that with the fact that most people donate. A large proportion of people volunteer. If you give people opportunities to easily help other people, they will take it. But at the same time, we're a product of our circumstances. And if it were more socially rewarded to be doing more good, if it were more socially rewarded to do good effectively rather than not effectively, then we would see that behavior a lot more.
So why should we do good?
Yeah, my answer to this is there's no kind of deeper level of explanation. So my answer to kind of why should you do good is, well, there is someone whose life is on the line, for example, whose life you can save via donating just actually a few $1,000s to an effective nonprofit, like the Against Malaria Foundation. That is a sufficient reason to do good. And then if you ask, well, why ought I do that? I'm like, I just show you the same facts again. It's that fact that is the reason to do good. There's nothing more fundamental than that.
I'd like to sort of make more concrete the thing we're trying to make better. So you just mentioned malaria. So there's a huge amount of suffering in the world. Are we trying to remove... So is ultimately the goal, not ultimately, but the first step is to remove the worst of the suffering. So there's some kind of threshold of suffering that we want to make sure does not